Okay, so it looks like we are live here. Welcome to anybody who's viewing with us and anybody who's not viewing live and are going to be looking at this a little bit later on. My name is Andrew Welker. I work for Axiom Audio up in northern Ontario, Canada. We're about 2 hours north of Toronto, and I hope everybody's doing well. I do engineering, design, electronics, and stuff like this. But this is an interesting topic for me because I'm a vinyl nut. If anybody knows me, they know that I have an entire room full of records in my house, and thought, given what's been going on lately, be nice to just have a little discussion. And I've got a guest here today. His name is Don Lindich, and Axiom has known him, or he's known of Axiom for a number of years. He writes a syndicated newspaper column called Sound Advice in the United States. And he's actually fancied himself a product designer and come out with a new product. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. But Don, why don't you introduce yourself, tell a few people about, who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. My name's Don Lindich. I'm a syndicated columnist here in the United States. I've been writing the Sound Advice column since 2002. July 4th, our Independence Day, was actually the first time it ran. It's run continuously since then. I started with a single newspaper, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, here in Pittsburgh, and then I picked up a second paper not long afterwards, and within a year I had a syndication contract, and right now it appears in a couple of dozen major newspapers nationwide and has about 4 million readers. So I have a pretty good, it's a Q&A column, and in the column I'll review and recommend products that fit the reader's needs, as well as just give them basic advice on how to get the most out of electronics and photo equipment that they have now. But it's heavily home entertainment based, and it's typically TVs, stereos, digital cameras, surround sound, personal gadgets, and electronics. I do some cooking stuff too once in a while, but it's a lot of fun to write, and I've made a lot of great friendships with my readers, and like people like up at Axiom in the almost 18 years I've written the column. So that's a bit about me. And I'm also a vinyl nut. And something that's sort of interesting is I came full circle to vinyl. When my first experience with really good audio was when I was at a photo studio, because I was an avid photographer when I was in college. I went to a high-end studio where a friend of mine worked as an assistant, and they had a CD player, and the guy's like, "Oh, that sounds incredible." And when I heard it, it sounded fantastic. And I had never been introduced to good vinyl sound because everybody had cheap turntables or rack systems and things like that. So once I got back to school, because that happened in the summer, I was in college, I started visiting the hi-fi shops, and everybody, even back then in the mid 80s, is like, records sound better. And eventually I bought a turntable, like, you know what, it does sound better. So it was actually CD that got me into audio as an audiophile and brought me around to loving records. And I'd have to say about 90% or more of my listening at home is vinyl. So I share that love with you, Andrew.
Yeah, that's interesting. I grew up with being surrounded by good audio equipment. My father was a retailer, a dealer. He had a couple of stores in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, which is a university town about an hour west of Toronto. And those were the boom days in the early 70s where everybody got their government university credits. And then they went and, they would eat craft dinner, I guess, and blew all of their money. As soon as the check came, my dad actually said he cashed some of these checks for them. They'd come to his store and just blow it on an audio system. So, I mean, that was according to him, that was the heyday of audio retailing. But because of that, of course, he had all these distributors and these companies coming up to him and approaching him, calling him and saying, "Hey, do you want to carry, Magnapan, or do you want to carry these guys or whoever?" And the deal was that they had to send him something for nothing that he could use at home for a bit. try it out. If he liked it, he'd do a deal and sell it in the store. So it was it was a revolving door of every piece, every brand of good high-end audio equipment when I was a kid growing up. So, and of course, at that time, it was there was no CD. So that was the my exposure to records. And my dad also, as was common, I guess, in a lot of audio retailers at that time, he sold records as well. I mean, he had contracts with the record distributors, so he was a record store and an audio store. And of course, he got promo copies of everything. So he had a record collection that was just mind blowing. And somehow he got suckered on the CD bandwagon. I don't know how. He bought actually one of the first 5 or 6 units that actually made it into Canada. So he had the first Sony CDP 101 CD player. Bought that, and then we used to run around Toronto trying to find somebody who had CDs, because the record stores didn't even know what they were so new. But he was smitten with not having to fuss with compact discs and the turntable setup and the cleaning and all of those things. And unfortunately, I was too young at the point. I didn't even have a paper route. I was too young for that. And he sold all of his LPs.
Oh no!
And at every turn, I remind him and I tell him, "Do you have any idea what some of those discs are worth today?" And I'll give him an example. I'll say, "Hey, Dad, you remember this LP?" I'll bring it over when we visit, and he'll go, "Oh, yeah, I had a copy of that." I said, "I just paid $100 for it, and I got a deal." So think about that now, extrapolated to thousands of LPs. But
it's really interesting because we've come full circle to that, because now CDs, they're a lot less being sold. And vinyl is the growth market in packaged media, and CDs are in decline to the point where Best Buy doesn't sell CDs anymore. And I guess that's Future Shop up in Canada, though I believe you have Best Buys there as well. But they have new vinyl on the shelves. Not a lot of it is there. And I think part of it, like going back to the equipment, probably for the one thing that digital does have going for it is it's repeatable, and it's pretty easy to get the results. Like you mentioned, the setup of the turntable. You can't get a CD in as long as it doesn't get laser rot and you take reasonably good care of it. It's still going to sound good years later. But if you don't take care of your records, or you don't make sure your system is set up properly, then yes, you will. It's a bit more work. But a friend of mine who did PR for an audio company years ago, right when vinyl was trying to come back, he's like, analog. He's like, it's extra work, but it's so worth it. And it is a much more satisfying process, just dropping the needle and everything. It's more organic. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but yeah, it's really interesting the way we've come around from someone selling all the records to now people don't want CDs.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that story I said about my dad selling his whole record collection. It's funny that in kind of not exactly the same way, but the compact disc is actually responsible to a certain extent of me getting to where I am today as a record collector, because boy, oh boy, were those the boom years. The late 80s, right through most of the 90s. If you were a record and a vinyl person, I used to buy collections, as my wife will attest. 1,000 records for $100. No word of a lie. People were dumping their LPs. They got a CD player. They said, "Look at how small these are, and they don't take up any space." And it's now, okay, get rid of it. Doesn't matter, So in those, in the early 90s, I used to go to garage sales on the weekend, and I would come home literally with a car full of records for nothing. I wasn't making a lot of money. I was just out of university at that point. So, so thank you, compact disc, I guess. That's also why I've got, an entire room of our house is full of LPs. But hey, like you said, it's fun. And one of the things I like most about the hobby, if you want to call it a hobby, is it's not like collecting not that there's anything wrong with collecting, like Hot Wheels cars or something like that. But really, are you going to really do anything with them, or are they going to just sit on a shelf and you check a box on your list and okay, I got that one mint in box and it's good. The beautiful thing is you can appreciate records as a collectible. You can look at them, look at the artwork, but you can listen to them, and the performance is awesome. If you have a decent system, a decent turntable setup, which these days it's amazing. I mean, people think, well, records are going to sound really bad unless I have thousands of dollars to spend. That's, you've probably found this in some of the tables you've reviewed. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You really don't.
No, you don't. In fact, one of my favorite turntable combos is only $4.99. It has a nice wood base. It's got electronic speed control, built-in phono preamp. It's defeatable, of course. But going back what you said about records, there's something interesting about them too from like a cultural standpoint. I mean, buying the collections, I'm sure you see what people are listening to, the styles of art used on the covers, everything like that. And when you buy those collections, do you find yourself getting a lot of duplicates? Because I've done the same, and I have tons of West Side Story soundtracks and tons of Johnny Mathis, obviously very popular back in that day.
Yeah.
You listen to it, it's just kind of funny how that works out. But yeah, you're right. Even like you won't get incredible performance out of it, but you want to stay away from like the ion turntables and the ones with the ceramic cartridges because they don't sound good. Your records are going to wear out sooner because they have heavy tracking force and the inferior stylus on them. But even like an Audio Technica ATL P60 without the USB connections, only $99. And it's passable and it's simple to set up. All you have to do is change the stylus every once in a while, and there are stylus upgrades available. And one of my favorite turntables is a music hall. It's called the MMF 1.5, which has a really nice wood base, a very finely finished tone arm. You can get it with a vessel cartridge upgrade, which is one of my favorites, for $4.99. And ever since I've reviewed that, I've had tons of readers write back to me and tell me how happy they are. So yeah, it doesn't have to cost a lot, not anymore. And what's interesting is, like, again, going back to the compact disc days, there are more brand new models of turntables available now, more makes, more models than there were the same year that compact disc was introduced and it was brand new. So it just goes to show the growth of the format in the vinyl industry in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So, other than the fact, Don, that you're a fellow vinyl kook like I am, and you like spinning LPs, people might be wondering, well, why is Don here? Why isn't it just me talking about vinyl? Other than the fact that it's nice to bounce back and forth and talk about our common stories. So there is a reason Don, as I mentioned in the intro, has fancied himself a product designer and has developed a very, very cool accessory, which to my knowledge hasn't actually been done before. And I'm just going to do a little teaser of the box here, and then we'll let Don talk about his brainchild here, which is the Stylus timer. Now, I will say before I throw it back to Don that I've had one of these in my system or been using one for a few months now, and it's one of those things that when you get it, you're like, it's so obvious in many ways, not to diminish your work, Don, but I mean, it's obvious. Why didn't somebody do it before? Because it's really, really handy. So, Don, go ahead and you can explain what the Stylus timer is, what it does, and maybe tell us how you came up with the idea.
Sure. It's probably easier to start at the beginning how I came up with the idea. And I've heard that a lot, especially like I unveiled it to some industry people at the Consumer Electronics Show. They looked at it and they looked at me. They're like, I can't believe no one's done that before. And the way this all got started is, if a stylus has, or a cartridge, because there's a suspension involved in as well, typically around 1,000 hours for a good one. If you get something high end like a Quetsu, you might get 2,000 hours. Some of the ones with conical styli might be good for 500 or 750 hours, depending. And of course, the records, the condition of the records and how you take care of them has a lot to do with it too. But 1,000 hours is a pretty good rule of thumb about how long one should last. And obviously that'll go up or down. Plus, people talk about their break-in time when the cartridge was fully broken in, whether there are changes in sound quality once it crossed the 500-hour mark. But that's just kind of the gravy. The way this came about was I have a cartridge on my main turntable setup that's about $650. And it had been in and out of the system fairly frequently because I review cartridges. And after 3 years, I'm like, you know what? I have no idea how many hours I have on this thing. I hope I'm not starting to damage my records. It still sounds fine, but the degradation is so slow that you hardly know. And I'm just like, I wonder what I can get that will help me track my time. And I looked everywhere for some kind of meter or chronograph that I could use with my turntable, and nothing existed. I looked everywhere, and I looked, just nothing with the right combination of features to do it. So I thought, okay, what do you need if you wanted to have something to measure the hours on your stylus? What would you need? Now, that first of all, obviously, it has to record hours because minutes and seconds are useless when you're talking 1,000 hours. So you want to record hours. You have to know when it's operating, so that if the display is only going to change once per hour, you need to know that it's actually recording. You would want it to remember the time when you change the battery, because the stylus will last longer than the battery in a lot of cases. You don't have to start over. You want to make it require deliberate effort to reset it, because if you brush the reset button or hit it accidentally, you're going to lose everything. And if you're 600 hours in, obviously that would be a disaster. So what I did is I started with an existing shell, but the display and the electronics inside are unique and proprietary to my product, not available anywhere else. So it's a small device you can put next to your turntable, and typically, as you've discovered, and I put in the instructions, you put it to the left of your turntable, and when you drop the needle, you, with your right hand on the tuning lever, you push the start button with your left hand. As you can see, the H is blinking to show that it's recording hours. And then when you lift the needle or lift the tone arm with your right hand, you push stop with your left, the H will stop, and it'll read 0 until you have an hour on it. That's been, as they've been shipping people like it's not working, and I explained it takes an hour for the time to go. As you can see with the reset button here, I'm pushing it and nothing's happening. So if you hit it accidentally, there's no big deal. You have to hold it down for over 3 seconds, which I'll do here to reset it. So as I hold it down, you'll see, that's it. So it's a very simple device. It has a built-in stand in the back that comes out like so. So you can put it next to your turntable, and there's a magnet too if you want to fix it on the side of a component, which a few people have done apparently already based on my feedback. And they're $19.95 US, including free shipping. So I tried to make it affordable to everybody. There's so many expensive devices out there, not to mention that there are lots of people like you and me who probably have multiple cartridges. And the idea of spending 50, 70, 100 bucks for something like that, it's just not how I roll. I wanted it to be affordable and fun so that anybody could try it, to see if they like it. If you need more than one, it's not going to cost you a fortune. In fact, we have 2-packs and 5-packs that have been quite popular. And the website is stylustimer.com. And something I've discovered too is that it's kind of fun watching the hours climb, especially with the isolation practice put in place around a lot of North America. So like 2 days ago, I was at 30 hours, and today on my main one, I'm at, I think, 34. Yeah, this is the one I'm breaking in a cartridge with. But, that's it.
Very, very, very cool. I mean, I think I've got 121 hours on mine already, and I haven't really had it that long. But as you say, I mean, I'm now for the bulk of my time I'm working from home, and we live in a remote area, so it's kind of like, well, we're used to being by ourselves and alone and isolated to a certain extent anyway. But one of the great luxuries I'm finding is that I can be working on my computer all day, but I can be putting the record on. Every time I get up, I'll put another record on. So yeah, the hours are going up exponentially now on my turntable, but it's actually really nice because I'm now digging into parts of the collection and going, geez, I haven't listened to that in years, so that's been cool. I just want to interject for 1 second. Got a question from an Andrew Thompson. I actually know Andrew. I shouldn't say an Andrew Thompson. Andrew Thompson is a good friend of ours in Ottawa, and he's another vinyl guy. So his question, and both of us, I guess, can answer this: is there one album in your collection you consider to be above everything else, never to be played, handle with white gloves, and why that album? I don't know about the never to be played part. I don't think I have anything that qualifies there, but But Don, why don't you answer that one first if you can think of it?
Well, it's an unusual answer, but let me get the album. It's nearby, and I'll tell you about it.
Ooh, it's going to be show and tell. That's even better.
Tell day. So, yeah, it's certainly not what you'd consider an audiophile recording, but it goes back to my youth and one of my hobbies. But I've always been a fan of Disney. I'm involved in different groups, not so much the latest stuff, but the vintage stuff, going back to the theme parks and the attractions there and everything. And I don't even know when and where I bought this, but I have 2 copies now, including one that I take very good care of. But I went to Epcot Center a month after it opened back in the 80s when I was a kid. My dad took us there, and they actually have an album with lots of nice art on it with music found on the attractions, which was done by the Sherman Brothers. Let me see if I can get that in there. There we go. And it's actually, Disney's always had very high production values for their music and their movies. It's kind of fun because it takes me back, and the music itself is catchy. It can be a little bit corny, obviously, some of the jokes in it and everything, but every once in a while I'll play it just because it's just kind of a feel-good record. And I have 2 copies. This is the one I take, better care of. But it's pretty unique and pretty rare. So this is one that's just sort of a personal favorite for me. And I think the fact that it's kind of offbeat. Something else too, not so much, but in things I like to collect. This is kind of an interest. This was a promo piece, but when we talk about records going back, and being a viewpoint, a snapshot of time, I'm an aviation enthusiast as well as a budding pilot, as you know. But this one here, Jet Flight, has a nice picture of a 707 on it. And it has music from all around the world, what it's like to visit there. So this is kind of a fun one too. How about you, Andrew?
Well, it's hard to say. I guess for Andrew's white glove one, that I'll go with total rarity first. And unfortunately, I can't. It was an off-the-cuff question, and I'm not at home, so I can't run to the record room and find it. But so one thing I've got. If any classical music fans out there know a conductor called Wilhelm Furtwängler, and a lot of his recordings done, between World War I and World War II, and then some just after the war, are very, very rare. But there's one recording that I have with him as conductor that was actually released illegally in the US market. And when his recording company in Germany found out about it, they went absolutely nuts and forced them to recall this album. And apparently there's not that many copies that ever got out there. And the reason that I treat it with white gloves, I have a mint copy that I found at, I don't know, at a garage sale or something, believe it or not, about a decade ago. And that album is, from a value standpoint, it's a few $1,000s if you can find one. So that really doesn't get played much. It doesn't even get handled much. It sits safely on the shelf by itself, and, we don't touch it. But, in terms of something that, that's an important piece of the collection for me, that I do play, is early on when I was starting to get into jazz music, I visited a record store in Rochester, New York called the Bop Shop, and I believe it's still there. But it was a huge store, kind of legendary in that area, and I was at the time I was looking for original jazz recordings, particularly 10-inch, so early 50s jazz albums, which are these days very, very rare and very, very expensive if they're in good condition. And I looked all over the store, and I was kind of disappointed because I was excited for this trip to go and find something really good to bring home, and there was nothing. So instead of just walking out of the place dejected, I went and I talked to one of the guys at the cash, and he said, "Oh, let me get the owner over here and see, maybe he's got something." So he came over and said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And I was fairly new to collecting jazz records. I didn't have a specific thing I could throw out there, like a title or anything, but I said, I'm really looking for some early Thelonious Monk albums. And he said, I think I have one. So he went out somewhere into the back, a warehouse, and came out with this record. A beautiful early recording on I believe it's on Prestige. It's a 10-inch, and it to this day is one of the most expensive albums I've ever bought. I think I spent the equivalent of something like $120 Canadian on it, which is, you know, a lot of money, but it's a cherished piece of the collection because it's a phenomenal recording. And today it's probably goes for 4 or 5 times that if you can find a decent one. So let me see what I've got another question. Oh, it's not vinyl related, but I think we'll allow it because we're on the Axiom Facebook group. We better answer some speaker questions too.
Definitely.
So Terry asks, he got a pair of M100s a couple of months ago. Curious what you would recommend for a good sub to match with those. I've got a pretty large room. Well, I'll just come out with the obvious answer is the big boy, the EP800. If you've got a big room and you've already got a big pair of speakers that have decent bass on their own, you're going to need something for that space. He's saying it's 18 feet by 30 feet. That's a big listening room. Yeah, an EP800 or a couple of, you know, EP500s or 600s would work good. I wouldn't go anything smaller than an EP500 myself because it's just not going to add anything for you. You need horsepower at some point when you've got a big space and you need to try to fill it with really low bass. So Terry, I hope that my wife just messaged me and said I should say hi, Mom. Okay, hi, Mom. She must be watching. I had another question I'm curious about. I'll answer it. But Don, what do you remember? What the first record you bought? Whether it was a 45 single or whether it was an LP? Do you remember?
I don't know if I do. I gotta comb my. I think actually, I don't even know if it was a music album. There was something, the story of Star Wars, which was I guess it came out in the mid '70s again when I was young. That had like a really abridged version of the Star Wars story with narration and you know, clips from the movie to tell basically the story in 45 or 50 minutes. And you know, really nice jacket art on it too. That's the one that comes back to me in terms of like I probably bought it about 8 years old or something. So
cool. Yeah, I remember my dad used to play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon a lot when I was a kid. I think that album came out in '74, so I would have been 3 at that point. And I remember it well, and I'd become a Pink Floyd nut probably directly because of that. But I don't know if it was the absolute first, but one of the first albums I bought at a A&A Records store. Any Canadians out there probably remember A&A Records. It was the big competitor to Sam the Record Man, and you could find them in almost every shopping mall across the country at that point. But so that one of the first albums I bought there at the local A&A was Pink Floyd's The Wall. And it wasn't when it came out, because I think that was '79. I was only 8. I don't know where I would have come up with the money, but it was probably in the early '80s I picked that up. And I particularly remember that because it came with a bunch of inserts, and there was a sticker that you could put on the cover that said what it was, because the cover itself didn't have any printing on it on the front cover. At least the original edition of it did. So that was one of the first albums.
that brings me back to, it's sort of like a shout out to Canada too. Rush's Exit Stage Left is an album purchase I particularly remember. It's probably one of the greatest live albums ever made. I know when All the World's a Stage came out, they said it sounded almost like a bootleg. And then when X the Stage Left came out, they said it was almost too good for a live album. But no, the music, the performances, the recording, everything on it's great. I listen to it all the time. I don't know if it's my original one because I've probably gone through several since then, but yeah, it's a great album.
Yeah, very, very good. You know, sorry to hear about Neil Peart's passing. I mean, that was a wow, not just the Canadians, to anybody who was a Rush fan, that was a really, really, really huge blow to the whole music community. You know, he was legendary as a drummer. I mean, if you were a drummer that like polyrhythmic playing, so different rhythms at the same time, I mean, I don't think there's ever anyone that's been as good, and we may never see anybody who could do what he could do before. But I know there was a lot of my Rush collection has been played over and over the last couple of months. But you know, I don't want to get everybody on a downer. That's you know, we have enough to worry about these days. But I have a comment or a question. You know, I'll see what your opinion is on this, Don. And because I've been asked before, I now, as vinyl's becoming more popular, I have a lot of friends and relatives that ask me for advice. You know, I want to buy my first turntable, or how do I get into this, or whatever. And one of the questions that comes up a lot is, you know, how much money should I spend on a cartridge? And you know, even if you just go on Amazon and you put, you know, turntable cartridge or phono cartridge in the search bar, you'll get hundreds of things ranging from probably 40 or 50 bucks all the way up to thousands of dollars, most likely. And you know, what should I buy? Now, in different price categories, I have my recommendations, but the way I was going to comment that is that I'm not a firm believer in spending big dollars on cartridges, because they do wear out. I mean, we just talked about your Stylus timer and tracking. You know, unlike a CD player, which I guess technically the laser can wear out at some point, years and years from now. You know, cartridges don't last that long, especially if you play a lot of records. You know, you might get a few years out of them. I'm not a big proponent in, even though I have what most people would consider a stupidly expensive turntable setup at home, I don't spend thousands of dollars on my cartridges because they do wear out. I'm kind of a $500 to $1,000 is my sweet spot, based on, you know, I'll make that investment for X number of records and that's it. But you know, when I hear about, you know, $10,000 or $15,000 cartridges, and I just start doing the mental math. Okay, so let's assume that I get 2,000 hours out of that. 2,000, you know, how many records divided into 10,000 or 15,000? I start, you know, I get a headache and go like, that's nuts to me. But I wanted to know what your thought was, that, you know, on that. You know, you review equipment, so you've probably come across some more, you know, pricey offerings.
Well, again, sort of like working backwards, something, not only do cartridges wear out, they're fragile and they break. I remember when I was reviewing for about 3 years, I had a nice $450 Audio-Technica low output moving coil I was mounting to review, and there was a slip of the hand and a snapping sound. And I looked down at a cartridge without a cantilever or a stylus, and I was absolutely, you know, mortified. And I called the PR guy and I said, look, I am really sorry. I will pay to replace this, you know, the whole thing. He's like, Don, he's like, everybody does that. It happens. So if you're going to have a really expensive cartridge, you should really be good with the fine tools, or pay to have it mounted for you, either at a local shop or a place that can deliver it on a head shelf. You have interchangeable head shelves. So yeah, I'm with you. I think $500 to $1,000, you can get a really great cartridge. You can get a really great cartridge for a lot less than that. And I try and use car analogies sometimes, because it's a lot of things that people understand. It's like the turntable always comes before the cartridge, because you can put it Ivor Tiefenbrunn, I believe is how it's pronounced, proved it years ago, that if you have a really good turntable and put an inexpensive cartridge on it, it will sound better than a cheap turntable with an expensive cartridge. If you think of it like a car, if you have an economy car and you put really high performance tires on it, you're not really going to be able to get all the most out of those tires. It's kind of wasted. And likewise, if you have a really good car like a Porsche or a Corvette or something like that, yeah, it'll perform pretty well with some cheap tires, but it can actually make the use of the good tires. So before you spend a lot of money on a cartridge, you want to make sure your turntable can actually extract the performance out of it. One of my favorite cartridges is only $99. It's called the Vessel by LP Gear. It's made for them privately. It's exclusive to them. And it's a moving magnet with a little bit lower output than most. And the Audio Technica 95, which is very popular, has about a 5 millivolt output. This one has about 3.5. So you have to turn it up a bit more than you would with a typical cartridge. But that low mass is part of, or the low output is part of the key to the good sound, because it makes less electricity. I'm getting pretty technical here, because it's moving less mass inside, and that allows it to extract more details out of the groove. And it's just got a really wonderful warm sound that's detailed and lively and musical, and it's only 99 bucks. And they do pre-mount them on head shells for people who have a Technics arm, or one of the Fluence RT81 is very popular these days. Right. And you can upgrade the Stylus to take it all the way up to the top of the line. So really, for $99, that's a really great cartridge. If you like a warmer sound, the Naga Elkas in the $300 to $400 range are excellent. And then you have some of the high output moving coils as well. Cambridge Audio has one that's pretty nice. It seems to be a little bit turntable specific, so I'd make sure it works well on the turntable. But yeah, I think 500 to 1,000 will get you a really great cartridge. You just don't want to overbuy the cartridge for the turntable. You want to make sure that it's a good match. And if you're investing, say, $700 or $800 or $1,000 on a turntable combo, you probably should put at least $700 or $800 of that into the turntable itself. Get the affordable but decent cartridge, and then upgrade that later, because you're gonna have the turntable forever, but the cartridges are going to come and go.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. We've got a question from Stephen that is asking, do you know some good field recordings? Field recordings, that's something I don't have much of in my collection, but I do have one that I absolutely love. And it's on the Riverside label, which is, I guess, predominantly known for jazz, although they did do some folk recordings, some blues recordings as well. But what it is an entire record of field recordings of Formula One cars, race cars of the era, with a description at the beginning of the track as to what the vehicle is and how much displacement the engine has, how many cylinders, and then an absolutely phenomenal start up close to the vehicle, and then hearing it go by on the track at speed. And they go through pretty much the entire lineup of Formula One cars that were racing at that point. I think the album's, I recall it being early 60s, but anyway, it's really, really cool, and it scares the hell out of my cat.
I love to hear that. I see a question here from Andrew Thompson about his dual 1219 and the Nagoka MP150. I think you're actually in pretty good shape there, Andrew. That's a pretty good match for that turntable. So I don't know if I would go that much above that cartridge, but and obviously if you get a better turntable, you will get better sound out of your cartridge. Like I said, the turntable should come first, and then you can it'll help you extract all that out of the cartridge. But I don't think you're really wasteful. I don't think you're wasting anything. I think you're in kind of a sweet spot where you wouldn't want to go up more than that. And if you do upgrade your turntable down the line, the cartridge will sound even better.
Any field recordings, Don, or not your thing?
Actually, no. I don't have an answer to that one.
I know that there are some. Stephen mentioned that there's a good field recording of a train. I know that there are a number of actual recordings of steam locomotives and things that are highly collectible. Probably not just record people who collect field recordings, but there's a lot of vintage train nuts out there as well. So yeah, that Riverside Racing album's the only one that I can think of. I was going to ask you another thing, Don. I just did recently a little video. Anyone who's interested can go to the Axiom YouTube channel and check it out. where I go through some of the LPs and not just LPs, recordings in general that I use to set up a system, set up speakers, whether it's to listen for bass detail or imaging or whatnot. So my info is out there already. I'm just wondering if you have, is there a particular LP that you, the first one when you're, you've set up a new cartridge and you're dialing it in, or you got a new pair of speakers to review? Are there specific recording or recordings that you pull out to check out when you do that?
Yeah, I have a mixture of classical music that Beethoven, from Deutsche Grammophon, number 9 that I like to listen to. In addition to a lot of it is just stuff that I'm familiar with because I listen to it all the time, be it rock, like even something like I said, Stage Left. For some of that stuff, actually, getting back to field recordings, I use digital for some of that as well. There's a company called Telarc that I'm sure you're familiar with. They didn't didn't make much vinyl. The vinyl they did make is excellent, but they have a lot of I guess some people consider them kitschy, but music from, for example, horror movies is called Chiller. They had one called Roundup that was very critically acclaimed. Stereophile back in the 80s loved it, and I picked it up, which has movies from westerns and movies and television shows. And Frankie Lane did the vocals in them, who's a famous singer of cowboy songs. But there are a lot of special effects in it. Like there's a crackling campfire with cowboys around it and coyotes. There's a horse running around the room. And some of the sound effects are very, very powerful, and it'll really test the limits of the speaker. And I was actually using your M880s, the LFR 880s, which really sing with something like that because of what they can do in terms of recreating a soundstage and the clarity and low distortion. So
Right.
Those are really an ear opener in my room. But if you look, anything from Telarc is usually a good choice for me, whether it be on vinyl. I do have some of their vinyl or some of their digital stuff for setup purposes. And after that, I sit back and enjoy just sit back and enjoy the music. I don't get super technical with it. I just make sure the speakers are properly placed and everything's tuned in exactly as it should be.
Yeah, and that's ultra technical recordings. I always tend to do. People will ask when when we're working on a loudspeaker design or an amplifier design or just setting up a system. What do you tend to listen to? And usually my answer is stuff that I don't really love, and I'll get a confused look on people's faces. What are you talking about? Why would you listen to something you don't love? Well, I have to separate, the things that I enjoy listening to for pleasure, for their musical content, versus things that are a tool, a technical, a setup tool that may do some, imaging or have very good bass or whatnot. And the other reason that I don't listen to stuff that I really enjoy when I'm doing setup or system evaluation or new product listening is I have to listen to this stuff over and over and over and over again, because you adjust something on a loudspeaker crossover or you tweak something in an amplifier or whatever it is. You're going to have to go back and listen to those same cuts over and over and over again. And the worst thing you can do is take an artist or an album that you really love and then get burnt out on it because you go to work every day and listen to it over and over. So that really is the reason. So I think we're about, oh boy, time flies when you're having fun and talking about vinyl, eh, Don?
It sure does. That went fast.
So I think we'll call it. We're at almost 45 minutes now, and this video is going to be up for anybody who didn't get to watch it live, and I'd really appreciate if you watch it later on and you have some questions we didn't cover, or if the video was good and I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe there's other topics, maybe we can do this, every few weeks or whatnot, set up a topic if people are interested in talking and asking about different audio aspects. Doesn't have to be just vinyl. Then we can do that. So I'd like to say thanks to Don Lindich for joining us, telling us about his Stylus timer.
Thanks for having me.
And Thank you all for watching. Hope you're all doing well. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.